Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. My guest today is a friend for more than 8 years. Christie is a mom of 3 boys, a wife, and a business professional with more than 14 years of sobriety. A true light, Christie can fill a room with laughter, and you can often find her surrounded by friends and family. Join us today as she shares openly about the challenges of growing up in an alcoholic home, the loss of her father, and alcohol and drugs at an early age. The incredible part, she turned it all around and now stands as a power of example of how living a sober life can reshape not only individual lives, but entire families. Welcome, Christie.
Very excited to be here.
When did things drugs or alcohol start to take an effect on your life that you knew that something was different here? And just start from the beginning.
So, I like to say, hi, I'm Christy. I'm an alcoholic. I like to own that title because I feel for me, I am an alcoholic and I need to remember that. And that I think that's part of staying sober because if I forget that I have a drinking problem, then, God only knows what could possibly happen. And as Jess said, my sobriety date is April 28th, 2009. So before I get into what happened and what got me sober, alcoholism is pretty rampant through my entire family. And I like to share that because everyone's like, well, is alcoholism an addiction because of, family, or is it situational, and it's kind of all of the above. But it definitely runs heavily in my gene pool. I grew up in a home that was, a loving home, but everyone in the home was alcoholic. My dad died when I was little, so I never met him. And I'm saying this because I used a lot of that to say, well, this is why I'm going to drink. Like this is, you don't know what my life was like. I had this horrible life, so I'm just going to be an alcoholic and I'm going to, whoa, 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 me. It took time to be able to laugh about that, but at the time it wasn't like a funny matter. I remember my first drink. I remember it so clearly. I was 12, which is young. Like I have a 10-year-old son and I can't imagine him drinking in 2 years. Like,
Yeah.
So I was at a friend's house and her brothers let us hang out with them at their party. And they said, if you clean up everything, you can hang out with us. And we thought that was the coolest thing. So we cleaned up the beers and we were drinking all of the little, like, we used to say, ask the beer. I don't know what to say, like the gross part of the beer, that warm part. And I started feeling a little something and I was like, oh, okay. And we raided the cabinet and drank a bottle of Jägermeister. And I remember sitting on the toilet being like, oh, this is fun. I like this. I feel silly. I feel, we're giggling. And then we both start throwing up. And then her mom came and we got in trouble. And obviously I was 12, so it wasn't like I was a day drinker off the bat. And from then on, I really just chased that initial feeling. And it just progressed. The more freedom I had, the more drinking I did. Drugs are a part of my story. I really dabbled in pretty much everything, but for me, alcohol was always there. I'm going to stop doing this, but I still can drink, and maybe I'll just have a beer instead of this, and it became my life. And it took over me. It took over my whole thing. And I think about, I'm 41 years old now, and I went through a lot of trauma as a child growing up in an alcoholic home. And for me, it definitely was, part of what made drink and keep and just kind of like get away from everything. I do recall kind of a pivotal moment in my life. And this is personal, but I like to share it because, and I used to not, I used to be ashamed of it. My father, I found his suicide letter. And I just remember being like, another situation for me, not about anybody else, but for me. I have this mom who's an alcoholic. I have, this situation I just found out. And I just was, after that, it was just like, F everything, off to the races. I didn't care. I didn't care. I drank and drugged like, there was nothing else around me. I made really terrible decisions. I put myself in situations that it's a sheer miracle that I'm alive today.
Mhm.
And all of those things, I remember right before I got sober the first time, I said, this is just me. I'm just going to be an alcoholic like everybody else in the family, and it is what it is, and it's like an acceptance came to it, but there were other plans for me, and I'm so grateful for that. I don't want to get into the war stories. Like, I was a sloppy, gross drunk, it just was. I'd walk into a bar and people would roll their eyes like, man, she's here, and that's the kind of person I was and accepted I was being. Fast forward, I ended up trying to get sober the first time I moved to Florida. I went to a 12-step program. I compared myself to everybody else. I said, how am I gonna, I didn't lose a house or kids. I didn't have a house or kids, so it was, people have this stigma on alcoholics with, drinking a Budweiser underneath a bridge in a
Yes.
paper bag.
Yes. Mhm.
It's like
Yes.
one of those things where it's like, how can this, young 25-year-old girl be an alcoholic, and I
Mhm.
believed that too. I was kind of forced to either, you're getting put into a rehab or a psych ward, or you're going to go to a 12-step meeting. And I was like, I choose the meeting. And, you know, it's weird because I knew I belonged, but I just wasn't ready. I had so many thoughts of, well, when I get married, how am I not going to have champagne? And it's like, who cares? But that's
Yes.
my alcoholic brain. I would start hearing little bits and things, and
Mhm.
I was like, I knew I was an alcoholic and drug addict, 100%. And it was the obsession of, I need something to drink. So I'm going to these 12 step meetings, and I'm like, you know what? I don't need this. I'm just gonna, smoke a little, and that's it. I'm not gonna drink or anything. And then fast forward, and within 3 months, I was doing all the things again and worse. And now it was a head full of, I know I shouldn't be doing this. I know sobriety is better, but I can't stop. And it just got very ugly and very fast. A lot of crying, a lot of, I hate myself. I wanted to die, but I didn't want to die. And, it me. And there was a part of me that didn't want to live like that, wanted to break the cycle. And, but I was so deep into it, and I was lying to my husband at the time. I was, sneaking around drinking. I would have, nips of things here and bottles of pills of these here. And I was, just doing so many things that, like, it was gross. But when you're in it, you're in it. And I
When you're
remember,
in it, yeah.
when you're in it, you're in it. And I remember, like, 2 days before I got sober this time and stayed sober, I remember looking in the mirror. And it's funny because I'm a blackout drinker, and I'm just a
Okay.
blackout everything, So, being in sobriety, I almost find that a little bit as a gift because I don't want to remember all the things, But
Mhm.
there are moments that
Mhm.
I remember. And this was one of them. And I was about 80 pounds. I had bags under my eyes. I had just lost another job. I was getting things from family members, and I was, just, it was just so gross when I think about it. But I think I needed it to be to that level of despair to get that hope, if that makes sense. So I was looking in
Yes.
the mirror and I was like, how am I here again? Like, how did it go this fast in this many months, And I was like just sweaty and gross. And, my one of my uncles called me and he said, I know what you're doing. And I'm like, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. And you're an alcoholic too. And it was just like, there was no listening. It was like, you know, I just, right there, I was like, God, help me, please. And that was my relationship with God at that moment. It was, God, get me out of this. God, help me. God, where did I park my car? Or where did I do something with somebody last night that I don't remember? Like, all the things, like, and then within 24 hours, it really hit the fan. It was a situation where there were several alcoholics in one room. A family member hit my husband, my husband hit him. It got pretty violent. And I left and we left. And the next morning, we went to a friend's house, and stepdad said, "You know where you need to go." And that man had 20 years of sobriety or so. The night before he said that, I still had some hard goods left over, if you will. And I'm in the bathroom doing what I need to do. And my husband's bleeding, and there's complete chaos around me. And I remember being like, "What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Why can't you stop?" And the next day I got sober, and I have been sober since. I look back at that day because, you know, at that day I was mad at everybody else. Well, you can't believe, he did that to my husband, and I was a professional liar. Not that I was very good at it, but I thought I was. So, sobriety, I know, talk about the gift of desperation. And, I'm so grateful for that because I had it, and I didn't even know what gratitude was until I got sober. But the next day I went to a meeting, a 12-step meeting in Connecticut. And I remember being like 80 pounds soaking wet, scared out of my mind. Someone said, "This is the safest place to be scared out of your mind." Sat in the back row, put my hood on, and then never left. I just kept going. And it was scary. I remember like I couldn't breathe. I was, and it's weird because it was like I was nervous but excited. I was like, I think I'm ready to do this. And I said we because at the time my husband came as well. We got sober on the same day, same year. And we both have 14 years of continuous sobriety.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's a miracle that we haven't killed each other, but you laugh about it all because it was crazy. When I first got sober, I was a lunatic. I was throwing candles across the room and still angry. And, I just know what to do with myself. But other people showed me what to do, where to be, help others, reach out to other people. I wasn't all about, but I wasn't all about a higher power and all that stuff. And that was okay. People feel like, well, I can't go to a 12-step program because it's all about God, and I think that tends to happen with, some people. And for me, I was desperate, and I liked the people that were around me, and they were just as messed up as I was. And I would talk about stuff that I did or said or thought, and they did too. There was like a 80-year-old man talking, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can relate to everything he says." But this time when I went to the 12-step program, my heart was open. It was open. And why? But it was just such a relief that I didn't have to live like this. I didn't have to accept alcoholism as who I am, and it's inspiring. It's gifts. I have 3 kids who have never seen me drink ever. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old. Um, growing up in a home with a mom who is an alcoholic, you never know what you were going to get, and I don't want to be that, and don't get me wrong. I am no angel and I raise my voice, but the difference is we talk about it after. "I'm sorry I handled it that way. I was really frustrated. I love you." And that works for us, because my house is chaos. In 2015, I moved to Florida, and I was angry. I was excited to move and get away from the cold, but I also like didn't want new friends. I was like, my friends, I don't want new friends. I got pretty depressed, stayed sober, but that's the thing. It's not always going to be that pink cloud people speak of, or, you're not on a daily happy, joyous, and free. Like, it's just not 24/7. But being sober, it's way easier and way faster to get back to that pink cloud than it is when you're drinking or using,
Correct.
in my opinion, and I just showed up. I forced myself to get myself out there and go to 12-step meetings here in Florida. And that's how I met you. And I was like, I raised my hand. I was like, I hate it here. Nobody has kids. I'm the only one. Ba 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 ba. And come to find out, Jess had the same age, has an incredible husband.
I remember that specifically. I do. I
It
remember that.
it was crazy. And, it's such a gift that, another journey of sobriety started here in Florida. I tend to get distracted at times and, not do the things I need to do to stay, well-minded. And, sometimes I'm in the future, sometimes I'm in the past, and the goal is to stay in the present. And it's hard sometimes, especially in this reactive world we live in, but gosh, I'm so grateful, and I never would think that this is what my life would be. I never thought that I would have people would say to me, "You're going to have a life beyond your wildest dreams." And I honestly wanted to punch them in the face when they would say that. I was like, "You have no idea how bad my life was." You know? But this is why I like to share my story, because there's people who feel that way, and you're not alone. You are not alone. We all have been through the trenches together, sober or not sober, and it's like you can't do it alone. That's my opinion. It's important to have your disease of alcoholism and addiction wants you to feel like you're alone, you're unique, your situation is worse than everybody else's. It's interesting because early on when I was talking, I talked about being at that party and, drinking the bottle of Jägermeister. And by me sharing my sobriety stories openly, that is now 3 years sober. And I just find that to be such a gift. I don't like to show off, but I like to share that it's possible. And lastly, to me, I think that this is such a good vessel to share that with, because, you see people who are sober and you think, well, look at them. They never drank or drugged badly because of sobriety. We have these beautiful lives, but it takes years to get there. And one of the biggest things my friends in Connecticut, we always say is remain teachable, always have gratitude, forever grateful. And when I just kind of having a bad day, I need to step back. I need to remain teachable. I need to take advice I don't want to hear. And I need to be grateful for where I am. 14 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to deal with certain things that are coming up now. But I always feel like there's no coincidences and things are being put in front of you because you're ready to go through it. And that's because of sobriety.
Thank you so much for coming, sharing your story, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.